Chapter 15. I've always wanted to try broccoli. Open the hatch up more, Dad called from below. I can't find my spork. Your what? I gasped. The hatch leading out from our root cellar was heavy. Brown stalks of weeds poked out of the snow. The ravine was deep, so we couldn't be seen from the road or any of the houses nearby. I adjusted my feet, trying to get a better grip on the metal. Dad lost his spork, Benny called from below. His flashlight is dead and he can't find it. He needs more light. My feet slipped and the hatch closed with a thump. I landed on my backside and thought about getting up and opening it again, but it felt good to just lie there. Dad was a superhero. He'd figure out some way to find and rescue his spork. A few minutes later, the hatch opened up and Benny and Dad climbed out. That was some quick thinking, son, Dad said, holding up a gleaming titanium spork. Once you closed the hatch, I could use my infrared goggles. Spork found, crisis averted. What do you need your spork for anyway? I asked. It's all you can eat sushi at Herman's dinner, Dad said. Superheroes get a 15% discount, and I prefer to eat my sushi with a spork. Dad pulled Benny and me together, and then put his arms around us. Going up, he said. Benny, Dad, and I shot into the air. It was after school on Thursday, and we were headed to the ranch. Dad flew straight up before veering to the north. We soared over the suburbs of Split Rock, then downtown Split Rock, and then over more suburbs. He flew over the dump and around the new cell tower a few times, just to show off. When the cold became too much to bear, I pulled the hood of my coat down to protect my face from the biting wind. Eventually, the suburbs gave way to open fields blanketed in snow, then finally to wide open spaces covered with sagebush, scrub oak, and the occasional pine tree. Dad flew low to scare a few deer. They jumped and darted away. Dad slowed, and I could see Grandpa's ranch as we descended, sitting there at the base of the small mountain we called Gun Sight Peak. When I was little, I thought Grandpa was a humble rancher, trying to dry farm a few acres up one of the canyons north of the city. After I learned the family secret, I discovered Grandpa owned the entire mountain, as well as a sprawling cavern underneath. I'm not sure how, but apparently superheroes make a lot of money without much effort. Dad landed on the front lawn. Nothing like a brisk afternoon flying around the city, eh, boys? Dad said. It really gets the blood pumping. We walked to the door, my shoes crunching in the frozen snow. Dad rang the doorbell, then stepped back off the porch. I'll be back by 7, he said. He crouched, leaped into the air, and was gone. I hope Grandpa's here, Benny said, or we'll be stuck outside for 3 hours. Grandpa was home. He opened the door a few minutes later, his voice boisterous as he said, Boys, come on in. Glad to see you made it. I followed Benny inside the tidy home, a simple rug, an afghan on top of a weathered leather couch. Nothing hinted that the humble abode was really the headquarters for a family of superheroes. Do you boys need an after-school snack? Grandpa held up a glass of milk. This creamy goodness was in the goat just 30 minutes ago. No thanks, Grandpa. If you've ever had warm goat's milk, you know why I politely declined. It's kind of like throwing up in reverse. Then what's wrong with kids these days? Grandpa said. When I was your age, I never turned down free food. How are you going to put any muscle on those bones if you don't drink your goat's milk? Grandpa finished off the milk, his mustache dripping with white froth. He gave an exaggerated sigh. All right, enough lollygagging. Let's get you two to Dirk. He rubbed his hands together and led me and Benny through the kitchen and out to the backyard. How are you boys holding up? Grandpa said as we walked through the snow toward the base of the mountain. Well, we're here to work in the motor pool instead of getting our super suits and going to battles, Benny said. Does that answer your question? Benny's been doing push-ups, I said, hoping to change the subject. He did 20 last night. When I was your age, I could do about 1,000 push-ups, Grandpa said. Then I got my power, and I could do 1,000,000. Kind of boring doing 1,000,000, though, and nobody wants to sit there and watch. Grandpa looked at me. What about you, Rafter? You doing all right? I'm doing okay, I said. Although there's something I wanted to ask you about. Fire away, Grandpa said. If I know the answer, I'll tell you. If I don't, I'll make something up. Benny and I were at the store with Dad on Tuesday. I said, You know where the battle took place? Grandpa nodded. I heard that battle was a doozy. Wish I could have been there. The thing is, I don't think the Johnsons were doing anything. I mean, other than shopping. At least, not at first. They get to eat broccoli, Benny said. I've always wanted to try broccoli. It looks like little trees. Trust me, Grandpa said. Broccoli doesn't taste as good as it looks. Grandpa put his arms around me. I doubt the Johnsons were just shopping. Grandpa shook his fist, then returned his arm to my shoulder. Supervillains don't shop. They steal. They were up to something. If it involved broccoli, then that's a red flag right there. I decided to get right to the point. Grandpa, what do you think about sitting down and talking with the Johnsons? You know, trying to come up with a truce? You can't negotiate with supervillains, Grandpa said. Even if we would sit down and talk, how would we agree on anything? We want what is best for the city. They just want to destroy it. Do you know that for sure? I asked. If you've never sat down to talk with them, how do you know what they want? We've tried talking with them before, Grandpa said. The Johnsons won't have anything to do with us. He shook his fist. You've tried? I asked. Grandpa nodded. Several times that I can remember. Once we tried working through the mayor, and once the governor even got involved. But it seems like just when we started making progress, everything breaks down. Why do you have to go through somebody else? I said. Why not just call up the Johnsons directly? Oh, you can't do that, Grandpa said. You have to have a third party in these kinds of talks. Neither side can know where you're going to gather tonight until just a few hours before the meeting. Otherwise, you might be walking into an ambush. My head felt like it was spinning. The Baileys were willing to talk. The Johnsons were willing to talk. So why has this talk ever happened? I bet that Oscar Redding guy who sent the emails would know. Grandpa stopped in front of an old-style outhouse under a large oak tree. He reached forward and opened the door. Skunks! He shouted, and I jumped. 3 skunks scurried around the inside of the outhouse. Dang it, I said. Don't scare me like that. Herman, Gladys, Lula, Benny shouted, leaning over to pet the black and white animals. I love these skunks. Grandpa had some pretty tight security out at his ranch, but he also believed in single measures. He said a few well-placed skunks were much better than any sophisticated alarm systems. The skunks couldn't spray, so they were more or less harmless. Grandpa stepped into the outhouse, and Benny and I followed. Benny shooed the skunks outside, and Grandpa closed the door. Good thing this is a 2-seater, Grandpa said. He made that joke every time I'd ever been out here. I'd only been out to the headquarters about a dozen times. I'd never visited the motor pool. In fact, I hadn't visited a lot of places that were hidden under the mountain. Pulling the toilet paper dispenser off the wall revealed a panel with a touchpad. Grandpa pushed a few buttons, and the toilet dropped into the floor. A door opened up at the back of the outhouse, and all 3 of us stepped into an elevator. The door closed, and the elevator began to shake, first dropping us below ground, then carrying us horizontally into the heart of the mountain. Okay, Grandpa said. You remember your cousin Dirk, right? I nodded. Dirk was 23 years old, born without legs below the knees. He was pretty much a super engineer. He understood anything and everything about physics. I could never figure out how a guy like Dirk worked in the motor pool, and yet all we ever drove were beat-up cars that didn't really do anything special. Now remember, Grandpa said, Dirk is a little particular about his vehicles, but if you pay attention, you can learn a lot from that man. I'm glad he's particular about the vehicles because nobody else wants to be, I muttered under my breath. The elevator came to a stop. The doors opened, and for a moment I thought somebody was pulling a trick. I'd expected a dingy room cluttered with spare parts and old vehicles that Dirk tried to keep limping along. It was nothing like that. Holy avocado buckets, Benny said, stepping out of the elevator. I followed him, looking around and trying to take everything in. The motor pool filled a sprawling warehouse. The walls and floor were stainless steel. Bright lights overhead emanated a soft, high-pitched hum. Dirk sat at a table holding a small set of pliers in one hand and a circuit board in the other. Behind him were rows and rows of the most incredible machines I've ever seen. Forest green metal, polished black rubber, and chrome as far as the eyes could see. Cars, motorcycles, and jeeps lined the left side of the room. Several jet skis, boats, 2 donut-shaped vehicles that I assumed were hovercrafts, and a small yacht sat in the back. To the right were 2 helicopters, a propeller plane, several personal aircrafts, and a small jet. In the middle of the room stood more cars, bikes, a tank, and something that looked like a miniature submarine. This is the coolest place ever, Benny said, his voice reverent. For the first time since the surprise meeting, I heard hope in my brother's voice. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dirk smile. He put down the circuit board he'd been working on and stood. He was wearing shorts, and his prosthetic legs, fashioned from some type of gleaming metal, were bent in a curved S shape and made a clicking sound when he walked. Grandpa gave Benny and me a whack on the shoulders, then stepped back into the elevator. Good luck, boys. I'll see you in a few hours. Work up an appetite. I'm milking Sandy again for dinner. The door closed behind me, but I barely noticed. I couldn't even form a coherent question. I just waved at the vehicles and then looked at my cousin. Dirk stopped in front of Benny and me and folded his arms. His smile grew bigger. You boys have just been let in on a little family secret, he said. I've been designing, building, and testing these vehicles for about 6 years. Your brother Rodney has been helping me out on the technical side of things. Why don't we ever use these? Becky asked. Why are we always driving around in clunkers? Well, for starts, we haven't worked out all the kinks, Dirk said. Some of these machines are still in the prototype stage. But the main reason we don't want the Johnsons to know. We're building a fleet of vehicles that will be able to run circles around anything they have. When we're ready to show them what we've got, it'll be years before they can catch up. I remember the barking robotic dog at Juanita's headquarters. Sure, they had a cute barking puppy that could pop bubbles. We had an entire room filled with armored vehicles. If we really wanted to, we could take out the Johnsons at any time. I had a whole new appreciation for working in the motor pool, to climb into one of these vehicles and sit behind the wheel, or the stick, or whatever you use to steer some of these machines. With a sudden desire to feel cold metal under my fingers, I stepped forward. Hold it right there, partner! Dirk grabbed me by the back of my sweater. He had a lean face, and it was clear he hadn't shaved in days. A few rules, he said, smiling. You listening? Up? I nodded. Eyes on me, Dirk replied. Not the machines. I forced my gaze away from the shiny temptations. This is my room, Dirk said. His voice was firm but kind. I'm responsible for every piece of equipment this family owns. These machines have to be in tip-top shape when the family needs them. Understand? Benny and I nodded. I can't have 2 kids running around messing things up. Got it? At the word kids, my heart sank. I wondered if Dirk even wanted us here. Notice the red line. Dirk pointed to a thick red line that made a large square surrounding the elevator door. 2 desks sat on one side, inside the square. We were on the inside of the square, too. The vehicles were all on the outside. You don't cross that line until you completed my training, Dirk said. Understand? Betty and I nodded. No exceptions, Dirk said. If I'm working on a car and it falls on top of me and I'm trapped underneath it, you stay on this side of the line. Got it? That sounded a bit extreme, but I nodded again. Notice your study area. Dirk pointed at the 2 desks. That's where you'll read and learn. If you study hard, you can pass my test. Once you pass my test, Dirk pointed to the line again, you can cross the line. I had a sneaking suspicion that the test wasn't going to be easy. Dirk pointed behind us. Notice the bookcases. I turned and looked. 8 bookcases filled with books, manuals, and stacks of bound paper stood against the wall. There were 2 desks next to the bookcases. Those books contain the information you'll need to pass my test, Dirk said. It's not as hard as you think. If you've got half a brain, you'll be able to pass the test in 2, 3 years tops. Dirk took a step back and looked us up and down, his smile teasing. Maybe 4 years. Wait a minute, Benny said. Just so I'm clear on this, if we study hard for 4 years and pass your test, then and only then we'll be able to drive these vehicles? Dirk shook his head. I'm sorry, sometimes I don't communicate very well. If you study hard for 4 years, then you'll be able to cross the line. That allows you to crack open the hood and start working on these babies. You can't drive any of these machines until you have your SVDL. That stands for Specialized Vehicles Driver's License, and you can't get that until you're 21. 21? Benny said, his voice filled with disbelief. So I can't drive these things for? He counted on his fingers. 9 years? That's almost as long as I've been alive. Actually, Dirk explained, you can't drive anything with a weapon system until you're 23. At least not on the road. Insurance reasons, I think. How many of them have a weapon system? I asked, though I already guessed the answer. Dirk smiled, and I thought I saw a hint of sympathy in my cousin's face. All of them. So, though sometimes we remove the weapons if we need stealth. So in those situations, you can drive them when you're 21. Dirk clapped his hands. Okay, you'll find the manuals to each of the machines in the first 2 bookcases. Books about engines are in the 3rd, transmissions in the 4th, auxiliary and weapons in the next 2, and the rest of the books cover mechanical history, design, mathematics, engineering, and physics. He pointed at the desk. You boys will start with something simple. I want to report on the history and purpose of the glove compartment by the end of the month. The what? I asked. You want to report on what? Isn't the purpose of the glove compartment to store gloves? Or is it? Dirk said, raising his eyebrows. Dirk turned and walked back to the table, his metal feet clicking on the floor. Silence settled over the room. Benny walked over to one of the desks and dropped heavily in the chair. Somewhere, a fan turned on. I went over to the other desk and steadied myself against it. My knees felt weak. I was done. I was tired, I was angry, and I was done. Boats, assault vehicles, aircraft. I was surrounded by a world of technology, action, and adventure, and I had no place in it. I couldn't even cross the line to feel the adventure with my fingertips. Right at that moment, I saw the truth. I saw the truth and I hated it. I would never save the day. I would never solve the problem of feuding families. I wasn't a superhero and I never would be. I was nothing. Pulling out a chair, I sat down at a desk. I could feel the hot sting of tears in my eyes. I looked down at the floor. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be in the world of superheroes if I couldn't be part of that world. I would run away. I would find a new place to live where there weren't any Baileys or Johnsons or saving the day, where a kid could get a B+ on his algebra exam. That would be enough. Benny sniffled to my left. I looked over and my heart broke. My younger brother sat hunched over his own desk, head hanging down. His eyes were red. He wiped tears off his cheeks with the back of one hand. In the other hand, he held a book. I saw the title of the book and my stomach dropped. A Brief History of Glove Compartments. I let the low burn of anger in my gut grow. Life had kicked me and Benny to the curb, told us we were worthless. And how did Benny respond? By standing up, shaking off the dust, and studying glove compartments, as if nothing had happened. Nothing could stop Benny. I felt my anger growing and turned it to determination. If my little brother could keep fighting, then so could I. Oscar Redding had tried to do something important. He tried to do the impossible, to get 2 super families to stop fighting. I pulled open my phone and typed in a message to Rodney. Send me anything you can find on Oscar Redding.